Items for review and discussion, recommended FY 2026 budget. Ms. Cohen, you're up. Oh, you have an alternate?
Yeah, I'll handle this. Casey's here for support and to answer questions and she did the heavy lifting on this, so I don't want to take the credit for it, but this is, we've worked hand in hand on this for a while. So let's start this with our overview for the FY26 budget. We'll start, this is essentially our agenda for this presentation. We'll talk about budget assumptions, we'll talk about our notable items, our funds overview, our general fund, parks fund, economic development, streets, wastewater, solid waste, water, golf, major capital projects funds, other minor funds, TIFs, and sales tax funds. And so we're going to go through all those things. There are not going to be a lot of slides about here's what's changing year over year because not a lot is changing year over year. Operationally, things are going to be very status quo. We'll get, when we talk about the notable items, I'll talk about a few of the things that are changing year over year, but mostly outside of the raises and the benefits costs, our year over year isn't going to change operationally. Now, there will be some capital things that are going to be changing, obviously, and we'll talk about those as well. So let's get into this. Our FY26 budget assumptions, we have in this proposal a 2.5% COLA and a 2.5% step for merit and tenure. That would be a 5% total for employees. You might recall that we do have CBAs with fire and police, and that when we did the latest CBA negotiations, we built in that same essentially raise for them for each year. And so this we are just proposing that we just give it to all employees and not just for the fire and police. 12 to 15% increase in health insurance premiums, and the reason that's two different numbers and says 12 to 15% is because we do have a 12% increase in health insurance for the current year because the insurance year is not the same as the fiscal year, and so the insurance year has already begun. And so that 12% increase has already gone into effect as of January 1. And so you'll have 3 more months of that, or three more quarters of that 12% increase, and then we're budgeted for a 15% just in case for that first quarter of actual year 2026, and which is the final quarter of FY26, if that makes any sense. Everybody tracking that?
Is this typical? Or is this above normal, or it feels above normal. Do we know why it's so high?
Well, the 12% was, you recall we had a couple years of fixed, and then we capped it at 12%, and then we had a bad loss ratio, and so they came and took the 12% when we came for this year. Our year is actually tracking better for this, this past year anyway, and so we don't. If everything tracks like it's going right now, we won't need the full 15%, but we do budget for that just in case. Because if we have a couple of bad months and it throws everything out of whack, the last thing we'd want to do is not be budgeted for whatever the premium increase is and then have that come through to fruition. So we are pretty conservative. We're super conservative when we budget for the insurance increase. I wouldn't say it's very normal for us to have a 15% year over year, but I also don't want to say it's out of the realm of possibility either. I mean, it could happen. So, 5% estimated growth in sales tax revenues, 5% increase in water costs from Kansas City, Missouri. As you know, we get our water from Kansas City, Missouri. 5% estimated increase from Little Blue Sewer District. As you know, part of part of the city flows the other direction, and we contract with Little Blue Sewer District. And then 15% estimated increase in liability insurance. Loggers increase, and these loggers numbers are actuals. For general employees, 1.6%, for fire, 1.9%, and for police, 1.7%. And so those are the assumptions that we're going by, and the major things that that could fluctuate are the insurance premiums, both health and liability. So, but we try to budget very conservatively on both of those. Okay. The loggers is set. There we go. All right, notable items. We've got a new IT position that we're adding to this year's operations budget. This is a somewhat temporary position in terms of what we're doing is we're moving IT, in the past, we've had our IT for most of the city, and then police has handled their own IT internally. And so we're taking that IT, all those services, and bringing them into the rest of the city IT operations. And we're doing that as staff naturally. We had a lieutenant that oversaw that who's retired, and so we've already started that transition. And then there's one employee in police that is close to retirement, and even though we can't ask him when he's going to retire, he's intimated that retirement is coming sooner than later. And so this temporary position is essentially, we'll be moving that position from police to under IT, which is under our finance department long term. And so when that happens, that position in police would go away. And so it's going to kind of double up to try and ensure there's a smooth transition. And the last thing we want to do is have any problems with IT, especially in the police department, given the history. If anybody's been followed the history from years back when we had issues with the police IT.
So was this a planned IT outage to help support that? I'm joking, but in all seriousness, I had to make a comment about how these microphones seem to work just fine, and then this happened, right? That was the last budget session I made that comment, so I guess I'm going to stop speaking up on those things.
Talk about unlucky, right? We have it in the capital FY26 budget to replace the microphones and upgrade the sound and the audio-visual system in here. And then, of course, as we're doing the proposed budget, things go out. So, I mean, it could have lasted another month and we would have been in better shape, but I guess you got to deal with what you got to do. We have a deputy police chief position, which is replacing a lieutenant position. I mentioned the lieutenant retired, and so that's not a full position. It's just a little bit of, I believe it's $21,000 added to that for salary and benefits. It shouldn't be a huge, additional expense. Rental inspection revenue, we're estimating it at about $50,000. We have an idea of what we're going to get from that because we have an idea of how many rentals there are, but we also don't know what kind of how people are actually going to follow through and how we're going to be able to get that revenue in right away. And so we're just going to estimate $50,000 for now on that. We have a new debt service payment for street and stormwater projects budgeted. You guys recently did the GO bonds approval for that, and so we'll have to pay on that in FY26. Golf will be making its last debt service payment in FY26. We've got a proposed, and this is a fairly new item, a proposed $6 million. We've talked about what we're going to do long term for our water improvements and what we're going to debt finance and how that's going to work, and we've got that planned for a workshop on March 25th, and so we plan to go through that, but we wanted to put a placeholder in here to start those projects this year. And so we got $6 million in there, which would include up to $1 million for AMI. Not that that's going to cover all of AMI, but it could cover the first portion of that. AMI is for those who aren't familiar, those are the automated meters that we would like to try to get implemented in the city. Homelessness committee, right now it's at $10,000. I have had some requests to improve that up to $15,000, so I have that in there as if that's something we agree upon, we'll make sure that that's in there before we come to you for the budget approval, the next two meetings. And then the general fund transfer to parks for the Carry Nation Days event is $25,000 still, which is what we've had in there in the past. So now's as good a time as any to talk about the homeless committee thing and see if there's any feedback on where if we want to go ahead and bump that up or if we want to keep that at 10. I know I've had some support already internally from council members.
I'm for the increase. I think we've demonstrated that it's valuable, even though people have used it.
Red's on.
So I'm for the increase to $15,000 for the homeless committee. We've demonstrated that it's been helpful, even though we've had 15, 16 days that we've been open at Park Hands and then several at the police station. There still have been individuals who've got frostbitten and needed attention. So hopefully with the increase we could get more participation and do a little bit more than what we currently have done in this past
maybe you could avail yourself to some other services, GED classes or cooking lessons or, you know, that sort of thing. I kind of would like to up our game and not just have a warming shelter at night, but to have a shelter that offers other services too, so.
Do we know what they've spent in 2025 so far?
Good question, and if we budget for it, we don't have to necessarily allocate it. So, I mean, we can plan for it, and I don't know that we don't have that data yet on what's been spent for this year. I'm sure we could get it. You have some information?
I show $0.
Yeah, it hasn't been, it's a reimbursement program, so I'm sure they've had some expenses, so it's a matter of them bringing it to us for the reimbursement. What I would recommend is if we're open to the idea of the $15,000, we go ahead and budget for it. We don't allocate it yet. We see how the receipts come in for this year, and then if they want more money and they have a plan for it, and they can bring it to council and say, hey, here's what our plan would be for the $15,000, and then we at least have it available in the budget for them to utilize. And at that point, we can decide whether we want to give them 15 or 10 or not anymore or whatever. You know, that's a decision we could still make.
So,
Hold that mic up to your mouth too for us. It's on.
we signed wow, I know why she was pulling it away now. We had signed or approved, signed's not the right word, we had approved an agreement for the reimbursement. Was there not a time period in which they have to come back for that reimbursement? When does that come up?
They just submitted the receipts, and so we should be getting their reimbursement to at least go through that process.
Okay, so because I go back to, that was exactly the question I had, which is, you know, what does it look like thus far? Because we weren't sure they were even going to use all of the 10,000 at that time. And the other piece is because we're specifically talking about one entity here. But in theory, we could have multiple entities that would want this money to have multiple warming shelters or cooling shelters. So I think I am very pro having our boards do and operate as our boards, right? That's their intent. That's why we have them. That's why they're in place and supporting our boards to make those decisions. So I hate that we're sitting here saying, oh, let's have it all come back to city council for city council to make that decision. But I guess without seeing the numbers, I don't have a better solution, and I feel like that's maybe the way to do it.
In general, that's as a committee, we've only given it the authority to recommend to the council what's allocated. So it would ultimately come to the council anyway at this point, unless we gave it more authority in the future. But again, if we decided to add the extra $5,000, it's not like we don't have to make the decision on whether we allocate that yet. We can decide as we get the receipts and look at what the expenses actually were and then what the plans are moving forward. We could have that discussion and then make that choice or decision then.
I would support 15,000 for the homelessness committee. I actually wanted to jump back one to the water improvements, including AMI. I feel like the last time we talked about them, I was mistakenly under the impression that was in the works, that we were getting them, and then I was informed that's a pretty high dollar item. There it is. What have we changed? What have we prioritized differently? Like, I'm excited to see this. I think residents will get a lot of benefit out of any sort of real-time read on their water so they can manage it better. I just, what firmed up in the budget to make this happen?
Well, I think that this is just for planning purposes. This is us saying, okay, we anticipate coming back to you on March 25th when we discuss the water improvements. we want to add the AMI as part of that conversation. And so we can say, here's what staff is recommending as a plan, and get the feedback from you all, have that conversation as a public conversation. This is just giving us the authority that if you guys so approved for FY26, we can start making some of these purchases. And if we do debt finance some of this stuff, it could be a year or two before that actually gets in process, if that makes any sense. This allows us to get some projects underway this fiscal year.
Thank you.
I'm glad you asked that because I actually had a question on that as well. So wasn't for those, I thought that was like a $20 million project or something. Is that correct? So this would be we're putting them in certain spots and we got to figure out how we would prioritize it type of
AMI is
situation.
not $20 million project. AMI, we believe, depending on, there depends on how, again, this is a whole workshop, depends on what we decide to do as a city, because there are varying levels. So we could do the reading portion of it, where essentially we put these on there. You can get the live reads of what it is, and then we still would have to physically turn it on and off by, have someone go out and physically turn it on and off whenever it needs to be turned on and off, but you'd at least get a almost real-time read on what the usage is. Or there's another component which costs a lot more, where we could actually make those turn-ons and turns off remotely, and not have to send someone out physically to the meter. And so, again, that's all part of the cost. That's all part of the conversation, because the costs vary widely from one of those products to the other.
Oh, so it's
Think $5 to
potentially-
$8 million probably for the entire city.
So it's potentially. Okay, I don't. It sounded like it was going in and out. Potentially a whole city thing, as opposed to. I was thinking we were going to have to prioritize doing certain areas from year to year or something. So
For the AMI,
Yeah.
well, what we probably would do is if we decide to do this, it'd be the whole city, and we would go ahead and contract that so they could get it all done essentially in 1 year. So it would be up and running.
okay.
Again, we can do a whole workshop on what the AMI is and what that's going to look like, and how much it's going to cost, and if we decide, and if we really want to make that investment or not. I think that's all part of the conversation, and this just gives us the ability to start down that path if we so choose in FY26. Any other questions on that or any other notable items before we move on?
Sorry, I'll just say real quick that I want to point out that part of Parks planning for that event does absolutely include our support. So, I would just encourage that we do have that in there, and it's good to see again, because that is a meaningful part of what happens for that event.
Mm-hmm. Skipped one. There we go. All right, here's our total all funds. These are just an overview: revenues, expenses, estimated ending cash balances, percent fund balance from the estimated ending cash balances. General fund is one to look at specifically, 35.8% fund balance. We have the public safety sales tax, general capital. Then there's the parks with 14.26%. Street impact fees, which is a very small part of the budget. Hotel, motel tax or economic development would end with a 22% fund balance. Streets, 114%, and streets is one of those things that we would want to spend down at some point with capital projects. And so, Marquee Parkway Regional Detention, that's again a small part of the budget, which is why the percentage is so high. And that's got to go towards specific things. Capital improvement sales tax. Again, that revenue comes in, and that'd be where we would be essentially funding a lot of these projects if we debt finance it. So if it builds a fund balance, that's okay, because we're eventually going to spend it as we get into these projects. Park sales tax has a 58% fund balance. Then you got some of the smaller ones: Mayor's Christmas Tree, drug seizure, DWI recovery, special training, and those are all very specific. General obligation bond. 119%, but again, that money goes towards specific projects. Major city construction and street capital projects, those would be zeroed out, and that's okay because those aren't operating funds necessarily. Those are for specific items. Stormwater projects, same thing. Then sewer impact fees, water impact fees, those have to go towards specific things, and so those will build a fund balance over time, and then we'll eventually allocate them and spend them when we have something that is worthy or that we can legally do that with. Wastewater, a 96% fund balance. Solid waste disposal, 30% fund balance. Water, 59% fund balance. Golf course, 14%, and then all of the total of all funds right now we're very, very healthy. And so we're sitting in really good shape as a city financially. That's the overview. So I'll start going through the general funds unless you want me to stop there, because we'll start going through some of these funds specifically, so that way you can see what that means. That's just the overview. General fund. All right, we've got we're estimating $15.4 million in tax revenue. Total revenue $29 million for the year. That includes $9 million in interfund transfers, 1.9 for charges for services, and then $782,000 for fees, $453,000 for fines, and end of year cash balance $10,475,000, which again was, I believe, 35% is what we'd said in the previous slide. So, and again, not a lot operationally changing in the general fund. We'll go through the capital projects here in a second. Other legislative, senior center administration. Here's what we're actually planning to spend in each of those, and you can see we have it compared to 23 and 24, and then the 25 budget, because 25 is not finished yet, including administration, attorney, clerk, IT, municipal court, human resources, and finance. Let me pause here and give you guys a chance to look at it. You want me to move forward? Keep going? Okay. More general fund expenses. We got public works engineering, inspections, animal control, there's the garage, emergency management, of course fire and police you'll see, and those increases are mainly for the salary and benefit increases. Jail, community development, capital. You can see that total expenses at the bottom. Start talking about general fund capital. We've got garbage can containment. We talked about some of this stuff during the capital budget workshop. Any questions about any of this? Now would be a good time. HVAC unit for City Hall is needed. AV equipment for council chambers. As you can tell tonight, that was definitely needed. UDC update. We've got that in there. Survey equipment and for engineering. Yes, ma'am.
On the UCD, UDC update, how long does that take when we start it before it's actually implemented? And I mean, I know we're paying for it, but is that a 5-year thing, or is that a pretty quick?
Yeah, so we will have the contract. We anticipate having the professional services agreement before council on March 25th. They would start in April and be completed probably July 2026. So a roughly 12 to 15 month process.
So but it gets paid for in this budget, even though we won't see the results for it until the following budget. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we've got it budgeted for now, and then if there's any that's left, just certain payments, we could always move it forward for the next year and budget for it next year, and it wouldn't come out of this year, if that makes any sense. We got a $275,000 expense in fire for the station alerting system. We talked about that during the workshop. $80,000 in facility improvements. We talked about the other fire expenses, the LP35, and then the expedition power chairs. PD, we got the evidence room upgrade, building improvements and maintenance for PD as well. Very minor amounts overall, considering the size of those buildings. Then the portable radios for PD, laptops for PD, and then some of the patrol vehicles, and then the in-car cameras for 3 of those. And other desktop, laptop computers for PD, office desks. I believe those office desks are decades old and falling apart in many instances. Pistol-mounted optics. That's our total capital budget for the general fund is $1.637 million. So,
I have another question.
yes, ma'am.
So, because I've just been here a short amount of time, I've seen fire come back and say that we budgeted for this 2 years ago, but we weren't able to get the trucks for, and I've seen the police do this. Is that a common, so we just put the money in place and we're hoping this stuff shows up? Or, I mean, is this a typical thing that we budget for things that don't happen and then the following year we go back and say this was budgeted for one? And I'm not trying to muddy the water, I just don't understand.
A lot of that stuff is not very typical, but it's become more typical for vehicles, especially vehicles and large equipment, heavy equipment. That's the kind of stuff that sometimes right now it's a matter of supply being available. And so,
So a lot of this stuff we know we're spending.
yes,
Other stuff we hope we find.
correct.
Okay.
And so we're going to budget for it in case we can find it and we can make the purchase. And if it ends up being a 12-month deal, then we'd have to postpone it to the next year. Then that's so be it.
If it doesn't get spent, it still sits there.
Correct.
Correct? So with it, when we do find it, we will be able to, it will be available. The money is there.
Yes,
Is what
correct.
I'm asking, I
Correct.
guess.
We have the
So
money
whatever
there.
whatever we put in this budget, that's what it's sitting there waiting for, correct?
Yeah, and if we don't spend it, it'll stay there in fund balance and we can spend it in the next year.
Okay.
Next year when we'll
Okay.
just have to make sure we budget
All right.
for it.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions on our capital? I'll add, this isn't a very, alluring budget this year. We're very bare bones and basic. I want us to be very intentional with what we do with the capital needs moving forward, and I think we should create some plans, which is one of the things we're starting is this water discussion that we're going to have on March 25th. But we'll have more, so we're very status quo with this year's budget, let's put it that way, which we feel like is very responsible for us because there's a lot of economic uncertainty we feel like right now, and so we probably should be more take it slow and be intentional with our purchases than being super aggressive. Let's put it that way.
And sorry, just to kind of piggyback off of the comment of like we plan for things and then they aren't there. That's probably the better way to do it, right? Because then we know we have that plan in place. So when they do become available, we can not only make sure that we have that equipment, but also have the budgets planned for it. When we had last workshopped this, we were operating in the red.
Yes.
Has that, I know there was some discussion, specifically I recall Casey saying, but she's working on reviewing it to make sure that that has changed. I just wanted to, have we made that adjustment?
Yes, if you come over here, general fund, we had mentioned we were over $1 million in the red at that point when we had that workshop. Our revenues are $29,253,000. Our revenues over under expenses, so our net is literally right now, if our budget were to come to fruition, $250 in the black.
I love it. Awesome.
So it's a balanced budget essentially, operationally.
And I have one more comment that piggybacks on yours. So we know we have air conditioning issues, in these buildings, but it looks to me like we're comfortable enough that if we had 3 air conditioning units, we could cover them without making any, I mean, I know that Casey doesn't want us to replace a lot or dress a pig or polish a whatever, but I think that we should, we have enough money to be able to do that comfortably without all
Yeah.
of us being nervous.
Assuming the economy doesn't just take a nosedive, I mean, we're in a good, solid position to where if we had some of these emergency expenses come up, we could, just with a simple budget amendment, make some of these things happen for sure, and we'd
Well-
be okay financially.
And I think it's important for taxpayers to know that we're in a situation that we're not going to be running down the street with our hair on fire at any point, that we're comfortable and can handle these issues. I think as a taxpayer, I like to know that anyhow. So
That's a good point, and I think that not only would we not have to run down the street with our hair on fire, we wouldn't have to run back to the taxpayer and say, hey, help us, we're hurting. We're well positioned to handle some things for quite a while.
I want to make a plug on that, though. Assuming that is that the fire sales tax doesn't sunset. So I guess
That
I
could
would
change
like
things
to point that
long
out.
term, definitely. So with that up in the air, then it's definitely in our best interest to not go overboard with our spending in the general fund.
Just refreshing my memory, if it sunsets, that ends in '26, correct? So we still have the next year, basically.
Yes.
Okay.
And will that be talked about in these budget work sessions that's going to be open? Will that whole sunset thing be addressed again so that we can remind taxpayers about why it's there and what we're using it for?
We don't have it planned as part of our budget presentation, but if you would like us to do something above and beyond for that, we.
Well, it's out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
We haven't discussed it in a while, and, I know that my attention span is somewhat short, so it might be something to readdress.
We can address what that means in as far as percentage of the operation and staffing levels long-term, absolutely.
I'll just point out we are exactly 42 days away from when that will be on the ballot. So out of sight, out of mind is right. We need to make sure we're, not letting that get forgotten.
Okay. We can do that.
Any other questions?
Can keep moving forward. Parks Fund. Let's see, the Parks Fund, we're looking at $7.3 million in total revenue that they're budgeting for. Of course, with the majority of that, 4.6 of that is from taxes. And then they've got a few revenue streams that they do rely on heavily to help them get those programs, keep them running. End of year balance, $1 million out of the $7.3 million. I believe we said the fund balance was, 15% earlier. So. Here's their expenses essentially in a nutshell. $800,000 for administration, 2.5 or a good chunk of it for maintenance, 1.9 to run the community center, and then 244 for the outdoor pool, 687 for recreation, and 700,000 for the indoor pool, and then almost 300,000 for the event center. They do have some capital that they are planning for the next fiscal year. Network switch upgrades, outdoor pickleball courts. I know that's been a hot topic in the community. ADA fishing dock, mill and overlay of the High Blue entrance, the mill and overlay of the Wallace Park walking trail, big all-inclusive playground, which is a big project for them at Wallace Park. I think the city is definitely overdue for an all-inclusive playground in a location like that. Cleveland Lake parking lot expansion, $350,000. Hot power washer trailer, half-ton pickup, deck furniture, John Deere Gator, flooring in the aerobic room, training room, and kids' corner. New wood gym floor, outdoor workout space, sound and AV system for the aerobic room, multi-rooms, pool and training room, locker room sprayer and vacuum, interactive water feature, bar, selfie station, storage unit for tables, chairs, a memorial station, and I believe Brian's here if there's any questions on any of that stuff.
Where are we putting a bar?
multiple uses, but mainly at our wedding venue when we have our own liquor license now, and also it's portable, so we can use it at all of our special events. Same thing with the selfie station. The selfie station is a very high demand item for our weddings, and they rent out for pretty significant dollars. So
Brian, is the parking lot expansion in planning for the Dryden property? Is that why you're expanding it now, or is that something that's,
no, that's not the Dryden property. That's Cleveland Lake, the existing parking lot.
but that will tie into Dryden property eventually, right? That whole parking area there?
By a trail system,
Okay.
yes. Yeah.
I have a question about the interactive water features at the indoor pool, replacing the turtle slide.
Yes, it is.
Great.
And I will add, we've submitted an LWCF, which is a federal grant for the all-inclusive playground, for half of that. So we're hopeful that we'll get that, and that'll reduce. That's a reimbursement grant, but.
Any other questions for Parks before we move on? Okay. Economic Development Fund is next. Total revenue, budgeting 611,000, total expenses 611,000, so it's a balanced budget. End of year cash balance would essentially be what we're starting the year with, and the revenue for that is multiple, hotel motel tax is one of the, and then the other one is marijuana tax as part of that. Economic Development Fund capital, the main capital project we have in economic development is the wayfinding signage. Of course, we've got part of that going in this fiscal year and then part of for next fiscal year. That's that in a nutshell. Any questions on that fund before we move on? No? Streets Fund. Uh-oh. I think I broke it. There it is. Maybe. All right. Total revenue for Streets Fund, $5.1 million. Total expenses, $5.1 million. So that's a $42,000 difference. And then end of year cash balance, $5.9 million. Street capital, we have the beautification. We have $75,000 set aside for plantings for islands along 163rd Street, Markey Parkway, and Mullen Road. Street and stormwater preservation program, $250,000 for that. We've upped the sidewalk, the Powell project amount to $100,000 as was requested by council. And the intention on that moving forward, I believe, is, as you guys have stated, is for us to let that build, and if it's not utilized and we can keep stacking it year over year, then maybe it becomes a bigger project down the line.
I was just going to reiterate, I would be thrilled to see DBMSI invest in some sidewalk upgrades using the 80-20 match program in the Chapter 353. Just always kind of planting that seed that would be a good use of these dollars.
Yeah, if DBMSI wanted to work with us, we could definitely, we could even apply for some other federal grant money and make that $100,000 and whatever they wanted to dedicate and really make that a whole project. Second Street improvements, $150,000 for that. All right, let's see. $106,000 for a crack seal machine. We have one, but it's 16 years old, so it's beyond to due for replacement. $30,000 for a Bobcat boom mower. Again, just a replacement. Mini excavator attachments, $8,500. Kind of increases the usability of that machine that we have, the excavator machine. Other street capital, diamond mower for $8,000, a Bobcat planer for $20,000. 72-inch sweeper attachment for $10,000, pressure washer for $8,000 to help us clean equipment. We do have an old unit that's replacing. Most of these are replacing old units. Concrete form truck, $110,000. See, our current unit is a retrofitted ambulance chassis. So we've been making do with.
It's a pain, isn't it?
Did you say never do that again?
Never do that.
Wastewater, revenue and expenses, we got total revenues of about $10 million. Expenses we're projecting $11.2 million, so we are eating a little bit into that fund balance, that cash fund balance, but that's not operationally, that's because of capital. Or operationally, we are balanced in wastewater, so we are making some specific targeted purchases in the capital side. Skid steer, air digesters for lift stations, samplers for laboratory, a replacement truck, some new sewer line for Olson Acres. Also have grant funding for that as well. I believe is that all? Yeah, I believe that's all grant funded, so that we're just essentially going to be the pass-through on that. Aeration disc and pump, $140,000. That's a replacement. Clarifier, $600,000. That's a replacement. And then the I&I program, we started that really focusing. We've been budgeting for the I&I for years, and then we've never really done it. This year, we've been doing some, and in fact, we got a project that's about to be completed the next week or two. And so we've been utilizing that, and I think we're seeing a difference when we're doing that. We're being very strategic about where we do the I&I and trying to address the areas that have had issues with backups into their houses and stuff on sewer, and I think we are making a difference with that. So hopefully we will get fewer and fewer and maybe no calls of backups in the future because of the I&I program. That's the goal.
I have a question.
Yes.
We spent quite a lot this last year replacing big-ticket items in the wastewater life, correct? I mean, we dug holes and trenches and got manholes down that we could reach and turn off valves but this is just to keep our system going. I mean, these are not things that are just happenstance. This is to keep our sewer and wastewater stuff going, correct? Yeah.
And we're a wastewater sewer utility, right? That we are the utility, and so yes, we have to invest in making sure that stays operational and try to improve the efficiency of it if we can. So.
And I'm assuming that we're setting stuff up for growth too, so that when we make these improvements, it can handle growth that we get, correct?
Some of it's just routine. Yeah. Most of it, I would say, was just actually routine. I mean, there's, not that we're ignoring that, but the growth factor, but a lot of this is actually just routine, and most of it's overdue, actually, to be perfectly honest. Wet well rehab for Fairway Lift Station. Yeah, that needs. I personally saw that one when I got to tag along for the day. That was fun. Solid Waste Fund. I broke it again. Here we go. We're operating this as a pass-through for this year, so it's essentially balanced. Total revenue, total expenses. You can see if everything comes to fruition, we're looking at $23. Water, we're at $12.5 million in revenues. We're $14.5 million in expenses, so that's going to show as a $2 million deficit. But operationally, again, we are balanced in water. This is for specific purchases. These are for specific projects. And water is where you're going to see that $6 million that we were talking about earlier. And so what we're doing is we're taking money from capital improvement sales tax, I believe, is a chunk of it, putting it into the water fund, and then we're using $2 million from the water fund balance to supplement that as that $6 million, if that makes sense, okay? We've got some trucks in here. We've got water tower maintenance, and then water line replacement. That's the $6 million project that I mentioned earlier. And we'll get into more detail on what that could be, or what, assuming you guys agree. This is just putting the money available in case we decide to pull that trigger. Okay.
Question on the fund balance. When we take that $2 million out, what is that going to bring us to? Because I remember it was quite healthy.
7.3 million.
What is that percentage-wise?
Some percent.
Because we were at like almost 100, right?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't quite 100, but it was, I mean,
It was like 90 something, if I recall correctly. And
well, yeah, I mean, it was about $9 million, and as you see, the revenues in FY25, $9.7 million, so was close to 100%, and then now it's at 59.
59. Okay, thanks.
Why we decided to do 6 million in projects.
Nope, makes sense.
Yep. Okay. Golf fund, golf continues to perform really well, although I think we're going to take a hit at the end of this year with all the winter weather we've had, but still a very popular course, a very good course, very good value, a lot of rounds being played there. Anticipating revenue 1.7 million in FY26, 2.1 million in expenses, so we are bringing down cash balance in that department a little bit, and specifically capital. Let's go. All right, here we go. If I can get it to click. Here's our capital. Kitchen renovations, we've talked about this one, I believe, with cold storage, needing more workspace. Irrigation system needs upgrade, and we talked about going ahead and budgeting for this, and assuming that everything keeps going well for the golf course, what we would do is we'd budget for this, and we'd probably try to do it toward the end of the year, or we'd pull the trigger on it toward the end of the year, assuming that revenues continue to be strong. The greens mower is definitely needed cart path repairs. I think we're overdue for some cart path repairs, and $100,000 would get a good chunk of that. Not all of it, but would get us a chunk. Range cart needs replacement. That's 13. So that's the golf fund. Any questions in golf? Okay. Major capital projects. We have all of these funds. Capital Projects Fund, Street Capital Projects Fund, Stormwater Projects Fund, Sewer Impact, Water Impact. Want to talk about any of those?
When you go to the next slide, you can.
All right, here we go. Larkspur, we've got a $2.1 million cost. That's broken down in the funding source, $380,000 to the city, $1 million from federal government, and $720,000 worth of bond revenue that we've already sold as part of this project. That's connecting Larkspur behind Powell, or behind Five Guys, connecting Larkspur to Powell. The Marquee Parkway project, which is $3.7 million of that's coming from federal money through the MARC grant that we were able to get, and then we bonded the rest. That's connecting 163rd to North Scott. Street and curb, we've got $8 million, and that's the replacement plan that we've shared online, paving and curbs throughout the city. North Cass Parkway, we got $5 million in there for that. We're working with, we want to make sure we work with TDD to make sure that they allocate that funding. That I know they've got that available. The county would pitch in on some of that, and then we would pitch in on part of that. It's important to note that the North Cass Parkway project, which would connect Peculiar to Mullen on North Cass Parkway, which would extend it past, you know what I'm saying? That is a huge, if we want to develop we want any development to take place down there in that area, that connection is going to need to take place. We've been told by multiple potential retailers that they would not go in down there until North Cass was extended and had a route to connect to, and didn't just end right there. So that's the hope that we can spur that. Hargis Gardens, we've got to continue that project, $1.7 million. Mill at Lacey, extending pipe and moving the road over to allow drainage. So that's those projects. That's all these right here in a nutshell. Any questions on any of that? These are the big projects.
Greg, can you explain moving the road over at Mill and Lacey, kind of what that's going to look like?
Basically, when you're going northbound at northbound on Lacey, and you get to Mill Street, you can't go straight across the street. So we're gonna be actually moving Lacey to the west. And we actually already own the property there. And so we can just move the street over. And that way, when you're going up Lacey, you'll be able to stop. It'll be a normal four-way intersection there.
Where Lacey continues north of Mill.
Correct. It'll just be straight across. So Lacey, as you're traveling north now, the road's gonna move over to the west to line up with the existing road on the other side.
Is that the house that faces like kind of diagonally?
There's no house there. It's an empty lot.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions on these projects? Other funds, debt service fund. $5.6 million in revenue and $6.3 million in expenses. You'll see that fluctuates quite a bit, the debt service fund, as we, that when we purchase or when we do the geo bonding, that revenue comes in. It shows up as revenue in this, like that's why FY25's got $19.7 million in there. And you only have $5 million in FY26 because we sold essentially $14.5 million worth of bonds. So that was shown in the revenue and expenses on under FY25. Does that make sense? But there is a little bit of a cash balance there, I believe. Also, mill levy supported for this. So, other funds, general capital, essentially $331,000 revenue, $165,000 expense, which leaves us a $947,000 balance. Street impact fee, a very small. We have to utilize that for a very specific purpose. Whenever we collect that, Markey Parkway, that's the detention, I believe, is what we've got on that. And so, correct, the Markey Parkway is the detention pond. Yes. So that way, we are planning a $100,000 project to kind of clean that up. There's money in that, right? That's come from the development on Markey Parkway. As they develop, they have a one-time fee they pay to utilize that detention, and then we've got fund balance in there now, so we're going to utilize that to clean it up and make sure it's operating correctly. Mayor's Christmas tree, and drug seizure, DWI, and special training funds. And then our TIF funds total. We're reporting our TIF funds total this year rather than having all the TIFs separated specifically, and then we're doing that for a reason. We've gotten lately we've gotten new guidance from the state, from the Department of Revenue, that says that we have to not give out any identifying information for specific businesses. And so if a fund is made up of 6 or fewer businesses, we are not supposed to report the revenue directly of that fund, if that makes any sense, because they think that somehow you can back into what each of those businesses is generating or making, and that's proprietary information. And if somehow people figure that out, we would be liable for sharing that publicly. And so, which is why I don't have specifically the amount that's coming from marijuana sales tax listed earlier when we talked about economic development. I said, here's our total revenues, and that includes that, because we don't want to be liable for that, since there's a limited number of those types of establishments.
And I would just say the resident that asked me that question is here, so I hope she got the connection there.
Yeah. So that's why we're reporting the TIFs all together, essentially, so that because some of those TIFs are going to be so small as far as the number of businesses involved that you could easily back into what those TIFs are generating and what those businesses are making annually. Sales tax funds, we have the park sales tax, capital improvement sales tax, and public safety sales tax funds. All are in pretty good shape, but definitely utilizing each of those. Without them, we wouldn't be able to operate some of these things. And that is it.
Last chance. All right, item 2.
If you don't mind, Councilmember Pryan, I would like to once again remind folks on the council that if you would like a deeper dive at anything specifically or all of it specifically, I'm available, Casey's available. We'll be glad to meet with you one-on-one and go through any of it or all of it or whatever you'd like. We'll just find a time and we'll do that. So we don't want there to be any questions about what we're doing here. It is pretty straightforward budget as far as the number of projects. All the projects we essentially listed, and then operationally we're very similar year over year. So
Can you give us the timeline for when this will be officially in front of us, not in a workshop?
yeah, the next two meetings.
Okay.
So that's essentially what I said earlier in my comments was we've got the budget first reading is going to be at the next council meeting, which is on March 11th. And there will be a public hearing there, and then we will do another public hearing at March 25th, and then that's the second final reading of the budget, hopefully. And I don't want to take that for granted. I know in past years there's been issues sometimes with that. But that's the intention, is that we would have that finalized on March 25th, and then it goes into effect April 1. Yep.
Go ahead. Okay, I was just gonna ask about water line replacement, following up on what voters approved in '21. When are we kinda gonna dig into what is currently our best option and plan forward with that?
March 25th is when we have that already scheduled as a workshop to go over potential plans for that. We have a recommended plan for that that we will share, and then of course, I mean, we've taken everything you told us and we've taken it to heart, and so we've got a plan for a potential $45 million.
Well, and the 6 that's in there.
We've got 6 in there, yeah.
Is
What?
that
Right.
plan.
5 for the,
We spent about
meters?
5. If you go back to 21, the projects that were listed, we spent about $5 million on the top 3 priority projects from that list, and they're already completed, okay? We've got at least 2 more projects that are the next highest priority that we could do in FY '26 with that money that we are setting aside if the council so chooses. And then the remainder of the next 11 projects, if we wanted to try to debt finance that, we've got a plan to essentially to try to do that. We're going to recommend we not bond it and try to do an SRF loan instead, because interest rates would be better if we do an SRF loan.
okay.
And I don't want to get ahead of the workshop, but I mean, yeah, that plan is coming forth in the March 25th meeting.
All right, thanks.
No, I think it got answered based on the question.
And this is not budget related, but we're current on all our audits and, no.
We've our FY '24 audit is currently underway, and so we should have that wrapped up here in the next couple months, and then we'll roll right into the '25 audit as the '25 year ends.
But that's timely, right? We're not behind.
25 would be on time.
Okay.
We've been behind. We finally got 23 done. You guys saw the presentation. Rolled right into 24, so we're in the process of 24, and that'll be wrapped up in time for us to start 25 essentially on time.
Okay.
Just gonna piggyback that question. What is the typical cadence for a fiscal year to end and then the audit launches? Like, when will we start seeing these in a timely manner, the way, we all want them?
Right, so our fiscal year ends the 31st, and we would typically start putting stuff together pretty soon after that. The audit would usually wrap up around August.
Okay.
Present to council, and then it gets sent to the state by September 30th. Now, I mean, we are not in violation with the state because we do send an unaudited financial statement to them, and we've been doing that since I got here. So we're good there. But yes, we have been behind since the day I walked in the door, so.
And the reason I ask it, if we decide to do some bond stuff, that we have to be in good standing with all the audits, right? In order
Correct.
for us to do.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And the bonds that we just sold, they know exactly where we are, and our rating was still very favorable. So
It was, do you mind saying what the rating was?
it was a AA rating. Yes.
Yeah, which is pretty good, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Anything else? All right. Item 2, mayor and city council pay. You're up.
You're not done with me yet. All right, I've done some research on this, and this is just to see if you would like us to present an ordinance to address mayor and/or council pay. If you have looked through the charter and the ordinances, you all have the authority to raise the pay for the mayor and the council, but it doesn't take effect until the next, for your individual position until the next seating, so or the next term. And so, for instance, if you were elected last year, even if we approved the raise now, it wouldn't go into effect until after the next election in term for that seat. Okay. Currently, the mayor makes $16,800 in annual pay, has a $7,200 car allowance for a total comp of $24,000. That's what the mayor makes currently for that position. Our council makes $4,800 annually and a $3,600 car allowance for $8,400 total annually. That should track. I hope that tracks. And so I just looking at some comps. It's kind of there are a few cities that you could say are comps for Belton. Certain things are. I'd argue that Raymore's not a very good comp necessarily, especially when it comes to the mayor. Mayor's involvement. Obviously, by charter, the mayor is supposed to do things like the ceremonial things, appointment of committee and board members. Those types of things. He does lead the setting of the agenda, and so there are some extra added responsibilities. Obviously, runs the meeting as Councilmember Pryan is lucky enough to experience tonight. And then the mayor's also generally involved in a lot of economic development. When we do a lot of economic development meetings or discussions with folks coming in from out of town, looking at whether it's a developer or whether it's a specific retailer or whatnot. He's been heavily involved in that as well. And we have a lot more economic development than like a Raymore might have. I mean, if you look at our sales receipts, we're twice the size of what Raymore is commercially, essentially. Even though our resident count is very similar, we, even with them having Walmart, we sell about twice as much in retail sales as what Raymore sells, believe it or not. And so finding a true comp as far as what other cities we do, and this is not a comp, but I'm just pointing out some numbers for you guys so you have this for reference. Lee Summit mayor's 37.2 for total comp, although after the April 26 election, when the new term goes into effect, that's going to be bumped up to 47.5. Blue Springs is 31,000 total comp right now for the mayor. Blue Springs Council is 16,155 total comp per council member. If you go by the economic development side of things, I know Mike made the comment, and I'm not throwing him under the bus here. Mike made the comment when he started here. He's like, we have a lot going on economic development-wise, maybe even more than Blue Springs has going on when it comes to actual activity and projects that we have through the pipeline. And so that's not a terrible comp when it comes to that. Now, just for information purposes, the mayor in Raymore makes $12,000. So that's the mayor's total comp in Raymore. And the council makes $7,200. So I just wanted to give you guys some comps, just so you guys have some information. Oh, let me throw out Grandview as well. Grandview is a neighbor to the north. The mayor makes $19,400, and then the council makes $67.57 annually. So I think those are the fairly reasonable comparable markets. We did some. If you look at the last time the mayor's pay was increased, it was, I believe, 2017. If you were to do essentially CPI from that amount that was approved in 2017, that would push the base pay up to about $21,683 is what that number would be based on CPI. And council's number would go up to $61.95. So there is some justification for doing this just based on the cost of living increase and inflation over the cost over the course of the last 8 years. And so that's one component of it. And so I'd love to hear if there's any feedback as far as whether we should try to address this or not.
I'm just gonna,
So there's a mic right there.
I had to write a few things down. I feel very strongly this is our civic duty, and we shouldn't be getting paid to do this. I feel the salary we receive is pretty generous. Again, $300 car allowance and $400 for the other duties. I know the charter can set up how and when the council receives pay. And as you stated, also it states in the charter that the mayor shall be recognized as the head of the city government for all ceremony purposes and by the governor for purposes of military law, but shall have no administrative duties. Belton, again, is a charter city. The city manager shall be the chief executive and is of the city and responsible to the city council for the management of all city affairs. I also feel 2 candidates are running unopposed. I feel basically by them voting on this, they're giving themselves a pay raise. I looked on, found the average salary for a Belton, Missouri resident, and this is average, some make a lot less and more, was $42,725 for the year. If this passes, this will raise their salary after the April election. The mayor and the newly elected 4 will receive the raise. I'm going to bring this up. I don't know if it's appropriate, but in April, we have a ballot question concerning a 1/4% tax increase for the fire department, which is slated to end in August 2026. We are now asking the citizens of Belton to extend paying for this tax forever. I think it just reflects poorly to ask the voters to keep paying this tax while we're asking for a raise.
I'd be okay looking at the mayor's pay, but as city council, I'm not for that at all, raising that at all. I didn't get in it for the money. I got in it to help the citizens. And I'm not in it for the money, but I see the mayor puts a lot more time into this. The extra hours that he does, I could see looking into that, but as city council, not at all. I'd be totally against that.
I'll second that. I brought it up for the mayor. This is not the same city that we had 10 years ago. And so I would say whatever we think is fair, and we can talk about that in more detail, but that's what I brought up. But if everyone's again, I never brought up city council pay, so.
Mayor or city council pay, I guess we need to break those out separately based on the conversation. This is absolutely a civic duty, and if you've heard, any of you all know that that is extremely, very much how I feel about this. That said, we have a hard time getting people involved in that civic duty, and this certainly must be part of the incentive, so I think that shouldn't be forgotten. I'm not opposed to the idea, but I'm not sold on it either, I guess. The specific to the mayor, speaking not as a city council, well, I can't not speak as a city council person, but speaking specifically as a resident, I don't believe that we could have an effective mayor that was doing that, being an effective mayor, as well as having another full-time job to be able to make sure they can, make ends meet. I think that to have an effective mayor, we do need someone who is going to essentially devote that time, 40 hours a week or whatever it may be, to that job, to have a good, effective person in that role. I think we're lucky that we have someone that is willing to do that at the moment. The thing that I would like to see, and so this is related but maybe not the same, is I would like to see specifically city council benefits. So I'm not referring to healthcare benefits, I'm referring to amenities within the city. So even if we decide not to increase the salary, if you will, the pay and the car allowance, I think that either a heavily discounted or even potentially free admission to our city amenities should be something that council should have, because I think we should be encouraged to be using these things. We should know how they're working so that when we get concerns about them, we can speak intelligently of that. And like I said, I go back to the original piece, which is we have unopposed elections going on, and we definitely have struggle of getting people involved in that civic duty. So that's my 2 cents.
And I agree, it's a civic duty, and I agree too that I don't think at this point in time we need to be looking at increasing city council pay. I do think the mayor puts in quite a bit of time, much more than what he's obligated to do under the charter. So I think we have to take that into consideration. I don't disagree that there's a certain optic to look at, and we're asking the citizens to remove the sunset on the tax for emergency services, although I think the two things are separate, but I don't disagree that that's a concern. But I do think that it's worthwhile to have the discussion. I think we always should be able to discuss anything, regardless of timing, that benefits the city or would apply to the city finances. So I'm not asking, I don't think we need to improve city council pay at this point in time, but I think opening the discussion for the mayor is appropriate.
Earlier, I was going to propose that these would be two separate items, because again, I don't support at this particular time the city council. But I would be interested in discussion more about the mayor, because I know that the amount of time that he spends, I mean, it's valuable time for someone. And so that's where I'm at. I feel the need to make this statement, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but this is not a new tax. And when you said a new tax, this is a continuation of a tax that's been around since 2006. And so I just want to make sure that citizens hear this is not a new tax. This is asking for a continuation of the tax that's been since 2006.
I understand what Brett is saying, but I still feel, and nothing against the fire because we need them, I just feel that tax was slated to end in 2026. This is essentially a new tax that's going to replace it, if I understand correctly. We're adding on, so the tax is forever. So I'm looking at it, I know, that way. To me, it was ending, and now we're asking them to vote to extend it.
I would just point out that the current tax rate would not change if it's, the current tax rate that people are paying in sales tax would not change if the sunset's removed off the fire. And we equate, fire budget is heavily personnel, right? And annually, especially operations budget. I mean, this equates to about 17 to 18, between 17 and 18, depending on who you're talking about, and their salaries, positions in the fire department. And so losing this tax would be a huge blow to the fire budget and would definitely have a negative impact on our ability to provide that service. That's just a fact. And so I just hope people understand that.
Yeah, in my eyes, they're apples and oranges. That is a tax going to the fire department for the fire department. The council, back when they set that, they had no idea that Belton would grow to be this big. And unfortunately, it's, in my eyes, necessary evil. We, pick which houses we're not gonna cover if we don't have that tax.
All right, to get back to the
and we're-
original,
Close to needing another fire station.
yeah. Yeah, we probably need more people and more coverage than less. Getting back to the original, I'm hearing this and prepare something for a discussion on the mayor's pay and leave the council pay off of it? Is that what I'm?
Although I do like Alex's idea of perks, and that's probably not the right word for it, but I like, I mean, we have committees that don't get filled, much less council competition. I mean, we need something. I mean, it'd just be nice to have some things.
Okay. All right. I think I have my marching orders on that one.
Any other discussion? All right. Number 3, paid maternity leave, once again.
Yeah, this one, there are a lot of cities on the Kansas side that are going to a paid family maternity/paternity leave. There are not a lot of yet on the Missouri side, but there are quite a few in the metro area, which is what we're competing against. There are some on the Missouri side that do have. Obviously, Riverside gives 12 weeks of paid maternity and paternity leave. Currently, the way we do maternity and paternity leave is that we obviously just follow federal guidelines. People can get up to 12 months in a year, or 12 weeks in a year, not months. 12 weeks in a year off. 12 months would be generous. They get 12 weeks in a year off. It's only paid currently under the current our current policy. They're only paid whatever they have of coming to them. So if they have sick leave, they have vacation leave, they can utilize that during that time of leave, and they can get paid whatever they're due. And so I guess I'm just bringing forth to you, would there be any support in us potentially offering a level of paid maternity, paternity leave? And we could do that in a lot of ways. I know some cities they do it as a family leave, which can have a broad definition. Some do it as a paid leave for a childbirth or a child adoption. And when I say family leave, that could be even like for taking care of a family member who's ill. There's lots of varieties of us being able to do this. If we just stick to the child, birth or child adoption, we don't think this has a huge impact on us budget-wise. It could be an easy win for us as far as recruitment and retention is concerned, and as far as just another benefit for our employees at not a large expense. I mean, as it is now, we're not getting more than 3 or 4 folks taking off for maternity leave, and then you get a few more for paternity leave, and so now if it were paid, it'd probably on the paternity side especially, you'd probably be utilized a lot more. But I guess, do I have some support to bring something to council to go ahead and offer up the possibility of paid maternity, paternity, and/or family leave?
Can you get us some numbers on other cities around us?
Sure.
By the next meeting?
Well, I can tell you some of them right now if you'd like.
And do we also have a shared leave program right now?
We do have a sick leave pool. If you choose to participate in it, then you can, or if you choose to donate to it, you can participate in it, is how it works. And so we do have that ability. And Fire has their own program, which is very similar in nature, to where they can take, essentially get into a negative balance and get it paid back and that kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, right now we have the sick leave pool.
Okay. And then, the numbers, I would like to hear what the numbers are, or what other cities do.
Well, I mean, you can get up to 12 weeks of leave by law, okay, in a year. And so, there's a few cities, Riverside, Lawrence, and Kansas City, Missouri, do 12 weeks paid for maternity and paternity. They also do, Lawrence also does caregiver leave. So I guess it's like a family leave. It's so you can take up to 12 weeks paid if you have to take care of someone. Lenexa, Overland Park, Mission, and Emporia each do 6 weeks paid. El Dorado, Kansas does 4 weeks paid. These are the numbers that we've been able to pull together so far. And Olathe has 8 weeks. So,
I have a question about sick leave.
yes.
Can you utilize that to take care of family members?
Yep.
Okay. So there's already a mechanism for that.
Potentially,
Yeah.
if you have the sick leave built up and,
Well,
and
true.
available to you.
How much time does the city employee get for the sick time? Is it a certain amount per year, or do they have to gain so many hours per month?
Yeah, it accrues at 8 hours a month.
8 hours a month, okay. Okay, thanks.
The potential, so it sounds like we're kind of saying, yeah, bring something to us, but I don't feel like we've given you any clear direction on if we think it should be 12 weeks, if we think it should be family leave or just maternity leave.
I have no problem with us starting and saying, okay, hey, staff will look at the landscape of what others are doing, bring you a presentation, make a formal recommendation, and if you guys want to tweak it and change it, then so be it.
Okay. I do have a couple of specific thoughts on it, some more policy procedure.
Okay.
As in when it can be used, how it can be utilized, that kind of thing. But in terms of bringing it forward, I am definitely in favor of us looking at this, especially if we're going to be, at least on the Missouri side, one of the leaders in this. That could really attract some good talent. So.
Yeah, I can't overstate what a fan I would be of this. We talk about wanting to make Belton a great place to live, work, play. And in terms of our financial responsibility, investing in something like this for the employees of the city and therefore their families, which hopefully live in the city but not necessarily, is money better spent than increasing pay for council or the mayor, in my eyes. We are, to quote the presentation last night in Council 101, we are setting the 50,000-foot view of where the city's going. We are not in the day-to-day. So the folks who are doing the day-to-day work and answering to residents and making our city run and maintaining it, that's where we should be investing. And just as a side note, as a mother who had like no paid leave and had to have a baby and go back to work like 4 weeks later, that's awful. And I wouldn't want that for the people that work for our city. And I don't think the residents would either. And then they'd probably want the same benefits at their job. So why don't we, use what power we have up here to say, yeah, we support this, we support our workers, and we support their families as much as we can, especially when the impact's potentially, 4 families a year. If we're only looking at maternity leave, if we make it family leave. I mean, I can't think of a more important time for our staff to be available to their family than if they're welcoming someone to their family or they're having to say goodbye potentially. Easy.
Well, and I see it, maternity leave was never offered back in the dark ages, but now that we're in the lighter ages, I like the idea of family leave and having cared for parents that were passing. It would have been very nice to have that. So kind of the family leave idea to me is even better than, specifically saying our populations are aging and we have families that work who have populations that are aging. So I like the inclusiveness of the family leave, not just dedicated to maternity leave.
We could easily, team this or tag it to the federal guidelines for that type of leave and just say if it's a qualifying event, you're eligible for whatever we decide. So.
Carla, do your research and whatever, but that is my understanding as someone who kind of deals with this type of stuff, is typically that's what most companies do, is they tie it to that qualifying event, so.
I didn't see anyone shaking their head no,
Sounds like
so get us some numbers.
I've got marching orders on that as well, so hopefully that's all you need to hear from me tonight.
All right, item 4, chapters 3 and 6, code adjustments for licensing, presented by Andrea.
Thank you. In November, we officially launched the Central Square and eTracket for business licensing and liquor licensing. And we quickly realized that we needed to make some code adjustments in order to fully utilize what Central Square will be able to offer us. In November, or since November, staff has been working with Patrick to amend these two chapters, Chapter 3 and Chapter 6. These code amendments will be coming to City Council on March 25th. They'll include our new licensing procedures and references to new terms like license officer, renewal period, and delinquency period. It will clearly define what the renewal and delinquency periods are. It will remove references to the term permit and change everything over to license, as we're trying to make a distinction between Matt's departments of permits and licensing's departments of licenses. Our other general updates will be language consistency, removing of duplicate language, obsolete sections, and removing and amending sections consistent with state statute, and also removing some zoning and UDC conditions, which are really part of the UDC, and community development will be reviewing those. An update to the schedule of fees and charges will also be coming with these two amendments to Chapters 3 and 6. Matt will be presenting a UDC update, which will include some of these licensing updates. That's all.
Any questions? Great presentation. Number 5, land use standards and North overlay updates. Matt, you're up.
The first item here is for land use updates and the North Scott overlay updates, which we will present in more detail at a town hall tomorrow evening, which I'll get to. So this is pretty much a similar presentation that I'll be giving tomorrow as part of that. So the purpose of the land use updates is this is the first piece of implementing the 2050 comprehensive plan. It addresses all land uses in the city, but we specifically are trying to address this now because of the North Scott overlay. We don't want to wait another 12 to 15 months to address that because we continue to hear from property owners and business owners of the difficulties that they are having with reinvesting in their properties due to the overlay. This addresses updated land use definitions, introduction of new land uses that are becoming more common that aren't easily addressed in our current code. We're trying to focus more heavily on special use standards and conditions rather than just outlawing a land use or not permitting a land use. There's a lot of ways that we can accommodate most land uses in a zoning district with certain standards apply to that. And the overarching goal here is to help expand business and employment opportunities in the city to attract, retain, and grow businesses in Belton. There's 14 land use categories. I won't read all those, but that's pretty much every land use in the city will fit into one of those 14 categories. And those have easy reference and definitions within the proposed land use table. I'm just going to go through the land use groups where there are some significant changes. There's a draft of the land use table in there for the particular land use category, and the uses that are highlighted in yellow are the new land uses that are proposed in the city. So in the agriculture land use group, we have community gardens and accessory gardens. We currently don't address community gardens in the city, and so there would be some standards to allow those within any agriculture, residential, or some of the more limited commercial zoning districts. Accessory gardens are the home gardens as well as accessories to businesses that may have restaurants, things like that, that may have a food kitchen or something, a food or a kitchen garden associated with them. Agritourism would be allowed with a special use permit and agriculture zoning. So that is something, Johnson Farms is a good example, Lewisburg Cider Mill, different agriculture uses that may have retail sales or events associated with them. We want to try to encourage that as an opportunity in the city. And then nursery and garden centers, typically those are just counted as retail. We don't allow retail in agriculture zoning, but there are different kinds of agriculture uses where a nursery or garden sale may be appropriate to sell the product that they are growing or harvesting on site. And then lastly is indoor agriculture. That is more of an industrial type use where you're exclusively growing agriculture product in a warehouse facility. This specifically does not include marijuana cultivation. That is a separate land use category. I know this is hard to read, but these are all the various commercial uses. Most of these are just kind of cleaning up some uses. On the left are the commercial services. The change there would be to add pet care services to the veterinary use. Currently, the way that the code is written is that any time that there's an overnight stay, it's considered a kennel, which requires special use permits. We don't believe that that is necessary. There's a lot of vet services as well as doggy daycares where there may be overnight stays, boarding for short-term stays, and we don't have any uses or any concerns or issues with those types of facilities. So we are proposing to allow those without special use permit. The special use permit would mostly be reserved for the kennel uses where you have extended stays, rescue facilities, things like that, or where there are dogs that may be, or pets that may be permanently semi-outside with outdoor runs. As Andrea mentioned on some of her updates to Chapter 6, it does address payday loans and consumer loan establishments. We are proposing to combine that into one term, which is short-term loan service, and that would be in compliance with some of the changes that the state has made to state statutes that accommodates both of those uses. And those would still have the same special use permit and separation requirements that they currently do. Construction, sales, and services, we are spinning off building or grounds maintenance services, which is a somewhat separate use, but essentially has the same standards. On the right-hand side, we are adding food truck accessory and then food truck court. So food truck accessory is when there is a semi-permanent food truck associated with the use. A good example is Broken Hatchet, which has a food truck on the backside of its property that it utilizes as part of their business. And then a food truck court. This is a relatively newer use. Haven't seen a lot in the metro, but it's becoming more common in other regions in the country, which is a semi-permanent food truck lot that has more permanent outdoor seating, lighting, and it can accommodate a variety of food trucks that may be there through for prolonged periods of time.
Hey, Matt, I have a question about that.
Yeah.
On the food truck court, would that be for like festivals and stuff, or would that be a different setting?
It could be used for festivals, but it's more, so the picture there in the center, that's kind of what that would look like. It could be a standalone property where multiple food trucks have kind of a permanent presence. So almost kind of like a permanent farmer's market, except instead of a farmer's market, it is housed with food trucks.
Could you combine the two?
You could.
Okay.
They could also be part of a permanent building that has a commercial kitchen. So the idea here is that this almost serves as kind of a business incubator space specifically for food truck business.
Because we just, now when we do food trucks, they get a permit, correct?
Correct, and they're mobile vendors.
No, they don't get a permit?
Food trucks are required to have a business license like a regular business, but there's no special permitting required. There's guidelines of where they can park and when they can operate, but there's no permits.
So if they're not from Belton, they still get a business license in Belton to come in once a year for a food truck?
They do get a business license, and it's good for the year, so they're welcome to come any time in those 12 months.
Okay, so we could do, this would work with festivals as well as putting them in other places too, correct? Okay.
Correct. We're cleaning up the indoor and outdoor entertainment and recreation uses. Currently, those are labeled as spectator sports, which is not the best definition to use. So we're cleaning up that language. And then outdoor recreation generally requires special use permit just to look at noise, lighting, and things like that of how that would impact adjacent properties. Retail, currently we have a small retail and a large retail. Anything under 100,000 square feet is small, anything over is large. I think we can all agree that 100,000 square feet is not necessarily a small retail, so we're trying to break that down. Anything under 15,000 square feet is small. We've added a medium category of 15 to 75,000, and then everything over 75 is then large. The reason for that is you would then allow small retail in basically all commercial zoning, so you don't end up with a large big box store on Main Street, for example. And then adding farmers markets, which would be allowed in, of course, Parks and Rec, but then also with special use permits in various commercial and agriculture zoning districts. On the lodging side, we've added, we do occasionally get calls about recreational vehicle parks. We've added that in just to make it clear that currently those aren't allowed in the city. That is something that we would like to discuss as part of the overall UDC update, but right now we don't have any standards or really any good locations of where those would be appropriate. And then short-term rentals, currently we have that listed as conditional uses in all residential zoning districts and commercial districts where there are residential units. And that'll be part of the next presentation. Vehicle sales and service, this is probably where we are proposing the biggest changes, specifically as it relates to North Scott. We are breaking down vehicle repair into 3 categories based on the intensity. So the vehicle repair minor are just kind of the oil changes, tire changes, rotations, windshield tinting, things like that. Vehicle repair major is more body shop for cars and trucks, such as something like Caliber Collision is a good example. And then vehicle repair heavy is when you get into repair of semi-trucks and larger commercial vehicles. And part of this would be special use permits for those minor and major uses in the C2 zoning district, and then allowing them with conditions in C3. So that's specifically of interest for the North Scott corridor, is that would allow the opportunity for most properties on North Scott currently that are zone C2 to request a special use permit for an expansion or redevelopment of their property, or they could then rezone to C3. That's the other option. So either way, they're going through some kind of a review process to make sure that their properties comply with the code. I think this is the last use group where there's several changes. To the industrial use group, we're adding flex space minor and major. The flex spaces, a good example is the photo on the upper left. Those are sort of small buildings that typically have a storefront and an overhead garage that can be flexibly used for contractor businesses. Sometimes we see small business incubator type businesses set up there, hobby shops, limited manufacturing production spaces, essentially small businesses that have outgrown their home or their garage but need a small commercial space to operate out of. The larger is sort of the right column in the center. Those are a little bit larger. So the small would be anything under 10,000 square feet in a building. Anything large is over 10,000 square feet. And then the other major change there is to storage. Currently, any storage facility is classified as a mini warehouse, which is typically what's in the lower right-hand picture. That's the typical mini warehouse where everybody has access to their unit from a garage door. Self-service storage would be the indoor storage, which is similar to what is under construction with the U-Haul facility, where all or most of the units are accessed through an internal corridor. So it's more of an office look. We're proposing to allow the self-service storage with a special use permit in C3 zoning, which would allow that in the North Scott corridor potentially. And then the mini warehouse as an accessory to that in the C3 zoning. So good example, the 2 photos in the lower left, you see that it's primarily the indoor storage, but you can see off to the side they either have some mini warehouses attached to the building or they could be standalone behind the building. So that allows more of a variety of storage unit options within a single facility. Prohibited land uses, I already talked about RV parks, but we are currently proposing to list data centers and battery energy storage systems as prohibited. Those are just kind of a temporary fix. Those uses we would like to explore more through the Unified Development Code update over the next year to develop the appropriate special use standards and location standards for those uses. The last piece of this is the North Scott Overlay District. We are proposing changes to this because it implements the new service commercial future land use category that's in the North Scott Overlay District in the comprehensive plan. This essentially would repeal the existing 36-page document that was adopted back in 2017 and replace with essentially 2 pages of standards. And so really what we're getting at that, there would be reduced setbacks from the standard zoning because we know that there's a lot of buildings along North Scott that don't meet the current setbacks, so we're trying to accommodate those existing conditions and encourage them to be reused and accommodated. We're also adding additional setback reductions on the front of the buildings when there's enhanced storefront designs. Metal siding has been an ongoing conversation about the materials. The material standards have been what we frequently heard as a big challenge in addition to the land use. And so what we're proposing there is that we allow metal siding or paneling on non-street sides and rear elevations in service, commercial, and business park areas. Overhead doors, if they do face the street, need to have transparency. And then allowing additional outdoor storage options when it is appropriately screened from the street and less intensive uses. There's just some images there that kind of show different designs that incorporate metal. I think there's a lot of, sometimes metal is seen as a less attractive product, but it can be mixed with various types of masonry and other materials to enhance it. I also picked a photo there at the lower right of a Chipotle where they're incorporating metals. So it's not it's becoming more increasingly common that that's just part of kind of the modern architectural design is to incorporate that into architecture design. Outdoor storage is something that we are trying to address. We are proposing to allow accessory vehicles and construction equipment in commercial zoning, and then in industrial zoning, adding materials and supplies as an option to that as well, as long as it's screened. And there's some general stacking, can't exceed the height of the fence. We're still have the shipping and cargo containers as not permitted. And then we're also allowing an exception for in industrial zoning, the dust-proof chip and seal for outdoor storage areas to help keep development affordable when you have a large outdoor storage area, rather than having to pave sometimes acres of land in asphalt or concrete. Again, we're eliminating the land use table for the North Scott overlay. Everything just falls back to the citywide land use table. As part of the improvements along the corridor, we're hoping to see incremental improvements, which is part of any expansion to a site. They would be required to address any property maintenance violations. We're trying to get a little bit of street frontage landscaping just to help add some landscaping along North Scott. It's very minimal as it is. Paving and striping needs to be addressed, and then of course bring any kind of screening up to standard. These are just some of the more, I think I already kind of touched on this with the various uses that are mostly impacted, including vehicle sales and service and the self-storage. I wanted to give a quick example of incremental improvements that we've seen on North Scott over the past year. So SMC Electric made an improvement at 803 North Scott. This is a good example of kind of what we're hoping to achieve with some of the changes. It's still a metal building, but they made some upgrades to added a storefront, storefront windows, new door with awning, additional overhead doors. But as part of that, they repaved their parking lot and added landscaping, which I think makes a significant impact to the street frontage there. So these are the kinds of things that we're hoping to achieve with some of the updates to this overlay. I'm not going to go through all this, but these are just all the different processes. We're trying to simplify the process. Currently, the code requires if you do a rezoning over 5 acres, you also have to do a preliminary development plan. But if it's a 5-acre property that's already developed and they're not really changing anything, the only purpose of the rezoning is to accommodate the land use, we can exempt that. If a special use permit is required, you don't also need to do a final development plan because we're reviewing the exact same thing. So just try not to double dip on the processes with that. Next steps on this, we have the Building Belton Town Hall tomorrow afternoon here in the council chambers from 4 to 6. We plan on bringing this before Planning Commission at a public hearing on March 18th, and then City Council for first reading on April 15th is what we're aiming for on this.
Regarding the North Scott overlay specifically, that stuff, and essentially repealing there's a lot of hard work that went into 2017, so I imagine there's some people that would be surprised to hear that word repeal. But in terms of the changes to that, right? So I guess what I'm trying to understand is, are there big changes to that plan, or is it incorporated in what you just went over?
So what we've heard frequently from property owners and the business community is that the overlay district has kept them from being able to reinvest in their properties. The land use restrictions alone keep, I would say, a majority of the land uses from making those improvements, particularly all of the auto service uses. Additionally, what in some cases it has caused is it has created some of those land uses to look elsewhere in the city and potentially taking over certain properties that we desire maybe for retail or restaurant uses, particularly along the 58 highway corridor where they don't have the restrictions. I think that's possibly why we also saw 3 different auto service uses pop up along 58 within a 1-year period because they were not allowed to go on to the North Scott corridor. So it's better to kind of to spread those uses out throughout the city rather than trying to concentrate them into a corridor, which I think is what the intent of the North Scott overlay was trying to do back in 2017. But it is keeping sort of redevelopment and reinvestment opportunities low there until we make some of those improvements to the code.
No, it makes sense. And a lot of the stuff that you talked about the frontage and the landscaping and that type of stuff is I think was, to your point, the intent, right, of the North Scott overlay was to help with the aesthetics. But I guess my point is that it'd be good if we can highlight that just because we're repealing that, we're still keeping that intent there, and we're keeping that, we're keeping a lot of those same principles in the code still.
Yeah, the overall intent of the overlay was to implement a 2014 plan that was done, and that plan was heavily focused really on property maintenance issues, which have already been addressed for most of the properties anyway. And this code just kind of builds upon that by making sure that before we allow additional reinvestment to be made on a property, that some of the outstanding issues are addressed as part of any expansion that they do.
Yeah, sounds good. And I will see what feedback we get at the town hall. So,
Any other questions? All right, number 6, short-term rentals. Matt again.
All right, last piece here, and I'll go through this fairly quickly. We've talked a little bit about it over the past year and a half of wanting to bring forward a discussion on short-term rentals. So we've been talking with the Tourism Council the last 2 months about this, specifically trying to get ahead of what we anticipate will be a significant increase in tourism metro-wide as part of the World Cup next year. And so what we're looking at is just trying to balance the benefits and challenges that come along with short-term rentals. There's a lot of benefits with it. including we are allowed to assess the hotel motel tax with these because it is essentially a lodging facility. It does support additional tourism and events not only in Belton but in surrounding communities. And then some of the challenges include the potential impact of existing hotels, motels. However, we have a hotel motel operator on the tourism council, and they are supportive of this. They believe that any additional lodging is good for the entire lodging industry. Loss of resident occupied housing units is always a concern when we have reduced availability and affordability currently. And then there's also the potential nuisance that can be created by transient guests in residential neighborhoods, but we do have some proposed solutions to that. Currently, short-term rentals are not permitted in the city. You have to have a minimum 31 days to be considered a residential dwelling. Anything less is a hotel motel, which is only allowed in a approved hotel motel unit, which are only allowed in commercial zoning districts. So the intent of this is to allow lodging options in residential units. These are the 8 components that are typically regulated with a short-term rental ordinance, and these are all addressed in the draft that we presented to the Tourism Council last week for their feedback. So these are the draft regulations, kind of the main points that we discussed with the Tourism Council. We are not proposing any zoning restrictions or a cap on the number of registrations by a zoning district, neighborhood, or block. The main reason for that is that we would anticipate that there will be likely a large, I don't really know if large is the right word, but we'll likely see an influx of interest in them during the World Cup, but we don't necessarily have a strong tourism market specifically in Belton that's going to allow somebody to operate a significant number of these and make them profitable. So we anticipate that people may do this for a short time and then revert back to either a rental or sell it for home ownership. We are proposing, though, that there would be no more than 5 registrations for any property owner or entity. And of course, like with the residential rental registration, we would want a local point of contact so we can get in touch with somebody local in the event of an emergency or an issue. Annual inspections required as part of their registration for life safety standards, again, similar to the rental registration program, what we would be looking at. To address nuisances, we would revoke or not renew any registration if there were 3 or more offenses, nuisances, or violations at the registered unit within a 12-month period. And then if they do get revoked, they cannot be renewed for 2 years. And then we would be collecting the hotel motel tax, and then the proposed annual registration fee would be $120, which is the same as a business license where they have a $70 fee and a $50 annual inspection fee.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How will you handle the inspection?
It would be, so once somebody submits a registration, we would then inspect it before their registration is approved.
I understand that, but if you've got people staying for 5 days, then they leave, have you
So
thought about that?
So they shouldn't be used, nobody should be there until their registration is approved. So in the event they have registered and somebody is there, we will need to inspect it once somebody has left, but before we can approve their registration.
But you won't inspect it every time a guest leaves every 5 days?
No, that's why it's just an
Yeah.
annual inspection.
Okay.
And then these are the questions or concerns that the Tourism Council had that were interested for council feedback on these items. The first one is about pre-existing parking being brought up to code. That was in the draft, and there was some questions or concerns about gravel driveways needing to be paved. That would be part of this, is to, since this is technically a change of use of a property, going from a residential dwelling to a semi-commercial use, we would like to see those kinds of property improvements made, especially if you have frequent turnover in guests. But there were some concerns about that, especially in Old Town where there's a lot of gravel driveways. If somebody wanted to register, would they have to go ahead and pave their driveway? Occupancy restrictions, a lot of cities have limits on that, 6, 8, 10 people. But there's a lot of different configurations to room spaces, sleeping arrangements that could potentially accommodate more if it's a larger structure. So one of the opportunities there was that could be established potentially at the inspection point in time if the sleeping arrangements there made sense with building and fire codes.
So on that point specifically, it might make sense to also base that on the size of the property itself. Somebody's got 5 acres or something, right, where their house is going to be more separated from neighbors. It might be more sense. It might be okay to allow a 20-person party, right? So.
Exterior signage, we're proposing no exterior signage since these are generally in residential districts. There was some questions about for rent signs, which those are real estate signs, so those are exempt. This is more about somebody putting up a monument sign in the front yard, essentially advertising this as a short-term rental. Special event declaration period. This came up in the initial discussion when we were thinking potentially about limiting these to certain zoning districts, but then allowing it in any zoning district with special event periods such as the World Cup. However, since we're not at this time considering limiting them by zoning district, I'm not sure if this is a necessary declaration that's needed. And then the last question were just some general questions on how we would distinguish this between a single family rental and how we would enforce that. So again, the distinction between the two is that a single family rental has to be registered if they're leasing it for a longer period of time versus this as if it's less than a 30-day period. So they're two different use types there.
Can they switch back and forth?
So the way that the draft that we have, they cannot have the same registration at one time. So if they are switching back and forth, they kind of need to make that decision on if they want to be a short-term rental or if they want to be a more permanent rental.
But can they give up the one and go to the?
They can, yes. They
Okay.
can. They can switch back and forth as much as they want. It just depends on how many inspections and fees they want to pay.
I was thinking of like a visiting nurse. It gets extended. They were here for 30 days, so it's under the 31. But then they get extended for 2 months. So then they wouldn't really qualify for short term anymore. So then they may want to switch. I was just thinking of the situation.
That's all I have.
Something to ponder. Any other questions?
So I'd like to understand, so we have specifically in my ward, and I believe it exists elsewhere, we have a large swath of a neighborhood that is 100% owned by a rental company and is 100% rental. If that rental company decided to take 5 of those units or whatever, right, and make those short term, can they do that? And how would that look and work?
They could do that under the way that this is written. Again, I think, and Mike might chime in as well, when we kind of estimate it, we don't think we're going to see a significant number of permanent short-term rentals in the city. Just we might see an influx during certain periods of time or certain local or regional events, but I don't think that there's enough continuous tourism going through the city that you're going to see more than maybe a dozen or so that would be permanent in the city.
Okay, I have some reservations about the short-term rentals for the negatives that you had brought up. And I guess I would like to see this potentially more on a special event type of period or situation is my 2 cents anyways, just to help avoid some of the long-term, short-term rental potential concerns.
Go ahead, Joe.
We could, if we wanted to, as a council, decide to do this on a trial basis and just say, okay, let's put this in, and we could set it up with a sunset even if you wanted to. Give it a trial and say if we want to extend it, we can extend it at a certain point and let it go through the World Cup, for instance, and see how it goes and see if it meets the community standards or not, and then have the city revisit it at that point.
I've actually done some research on this. There's not a lot of inquiries about Airbnb or VRBO or short-term rentals or whatever in Belton. I actually have,
That's because currently it's illegal, right?
well, there are some here.
There are.
There are some here.
I will say just because it is illegal in a community does not mean that VRBOs and Airbnbs operate. I know that I represent about half of the villages and entities around the Lake of the Ozarks, and not a single one of those allows Airbnbs or VRBOs. I think once a month I get a call and we have to file another lawsuit down there. So just because it's not technically legal does not mean they are not operating within the city of Belton.
And I really looked into this, and there just are not, on 3 different organizations, there are just not a lot of inquiries. Now, I think the World Cup will change that, but I don't think it's going to be, and I've owned on both ends of that. I've done B&B and Airbnb, and I just don't think there's going to be I don't think there's going to be frat parties happening in Belton on a swath of, taking up 5 houses. I may be wrong, but there's just not a lot of people looking here.
Are you saying do this on a temporary type where only when there's a big event have Airbnbs?
Yeah, or
Because I don't see how that would work.
what do you mean?
Well, if you do it only during big events, you're going to have houses that they're going to want to rent those houses out, which are going to be under a contract. So then how are you going to do a temporary Airbnb?
Yeah, so the original purpose of Airbnb to exist ever was the idea of people taking their houses when they go on vacation and letting somebody else stay in their house when they go on vacation. That was literally the purpose of Airbnb existing in the first place. So people have changed that, right? To your point, people have turned it into a full-time business where they own multiple and tons and whatnot, but because I don't think there will likely, because we're not a huge tourist destination, Kansas City alone, let alone Belton, we might not have that issue as Councilmember Thompson was pointing out, but I have seen it go awry, and I have some concerns about that, so that's why I personally would be more in favor of a temporary trial, if you will, or something of that nature.
But I did see something. You can get denied from this if you have too many hits.
That's correct. And
I think that would reassure you.
But even on that front, right? As the police knows, in order to have a nuisance, you have to have a neighbor willing to go to court for that situation, and the amount of times we have neighbors that back out because they don't want to go through that process is quite large. So it's hard. It's harder to nail down than you think.
I agree with Alex that even though the slide said don't focus on the negatives, I'm very concerned about the negatives of that, and that a trial period sounds good right through the World Cup saying, hey, we don't want people to miss out on the opportunity for this, but gosh, by the time you do all the work to set it up to allow it for a trial period, and then, is it going to even be worth it in consideration of staff time and effort? Pretty wary of this.
Are there any specific areas in the city that you think it's acceptable to allow these on a more permanent basis? Old Town was initially the location that we were thinking. Excelsior Springs and Lee Summit have a very similar setup to where they generally limit it to their Old Town, and if it's outside of Old Town, then they require a special use permit or some other kind of review. So that's another option that we could potentially explore.
I love it in Old Town.
I'm for Old Town, just as a trial, see how it does, so.
I would say at this point, we've announced it and the public has more awareness. Let's see, I mean, get a hold of us. That's what we're here for. So definitely get a hold of your ward representatives and let us know what you think. If you don't want it in your neighborhood, make it known. Or call Joe Warren.
Yeah.
I have a question. Didn't Kansas City have this program for these rentals and no longer support it, no longer allow it?
They had a number of issues with them not registering. And so they adopted some additional registration requirements and location standards. And that the registration requirements were very restrictive. And so that's actually, I think, pushed a number of operators outside to look outside of Kansas City because of that.
All right, last chance.
I guess I'll just say, like, I'm not opposed to the idea. I'm not opposed to the trial. I just am very concerned about it.
All right. All right. Thank you, Matt. All right. We were supposed to enter executive session, but I'm using the powers that were endowed upon me to cancel that, mainly because the city manager told me we have nothing to talk about. So I would accept a motion.
I motion that we adjourn.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call? No. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned.